Hello there, everyone. I am Justina Okechukwu, and I'm back with another edition of your Energy Frontiers. And these are the top stories we tracked over the week. Algeria state energy firm Sonatrach have signed a 3-year deal to sell 300 million cubic meters of natural gas to Slovenia via pipelines in Tunisia and Italy from January 2023. The board of directors of the African Development Bank Group have announced an equity investment of $20 million in Evolution Fund 3, a Pan-African clean energy and sustainable private equity fund, mobilizing about $400 million into renewable energy projects across sub-Saharan Africa over a 10-year period. The development of the first floating liquefied natural gas facility in Block OML 204 offshore Nigeria is set to kick off after UTM Floating Liquefied Natural Gas Limited signed a front-end engineering design contract in London. Nigeria's Indorama LME Petrochemicals Limited and New York Stock Exchange listed General Electric Gas Power announced the successful completion of a performance improvement package upgrade on the third 6B gas turbine at the petrochemical facility in LME, Rivers State. The modernization has doubled the turbine's output by 5.1 megawatts, bringing the cumulative power increase on all three turbines to over 10 megawatts. Uganda is set to develop the country's first ever green hydrogen power plant after it signed a memorandum of understanding with French-based independent power producer HDF Energy. The deal will allow for the supply of clean electricity in Uganda through the application of long-term hydrogen storage. Next on Energy Frontiers, the World Bank is focused on climate-friendly and sustainable cities around the world. This is Energy Frontiers. Welcome back to the program. Now, a new report by the World Bank shows that cities produce about 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions and must play a role in climate mitigation while adapting to better manage climate impacts. The report, which was unveiled on the sidelines of the just concluded COP27 Summit, brought together a high-level panel of prominent government officials, including mayors and ministers, as well as civil society organizations, to discuss the findings and recommendations from the report. Listen here.
Welcome to this discussion on enabling cities to thrive in the face of climate change. As home to over 80% of global economic activity, cities are important centers of opportunity and drivers of prosperity. They're also home to more than half of the world's population. As urbanization continues, we expect that 70% of all people will be living in cities by 2050. Increasingly, climate change is exposing cities to extreme weather events, as well as to slower moving stresses, such as rising average temperatures, sea level rise, biodiversity loss, and damage to ecosystem services. At the same time, cities contribute to climate change, producing about 70% of global greenhouse emissions. So, cities need to play a dual role. They must first act to mitigate climate impacts while also adapting to better manage climate impacts. What that role is varies depending on the city. Cities in high and upper middle income countries account for the bulk of global urban CO2 emissions. However, it is cities in lower income countries that are being most severely impacted by climate change-related shocks and stresses. Cities in lower income countries are less resilient, partly due to the challenges of providing basic services, affordable housing in safe locations, and resilient infrastructure to rapidly growing populations. Inadequate planning and challenges in providing high-quality public transport also means that rapid urbanization often leads to low-density sprawl and traffic congestion. This risks locking in higher future emission trajectories. To better understand the interaction between cities and climate change, we looked at data from 10,000 cities globally. Our analysis found that to tackle the intertwined challenges of climate change and urbanization, policymakers at the local and national levels need to work together.
So for those who don't know Lagos, Lagos is a city in Nigeria. It used to be a former capital. Lagos is low-lying. Much of Lagos is less than 2 meters above sea level. But Lagos is also the home of 25 million Nigerians. So about 12% of the country's population lives on a landmass that's about 3,507 square kilometers. So incredibly dense, highly populated, low-lying, prone or subject to pluvial, and sea flooding, and basically poster child for climate impact. I think, as has been said earlier, I think Marie mentioned that Africa is particularly experiencing very adverse effects of climate change. And so for us, this compounds the challenge that we have being in a highly populated urban settlement. To put it in context, Lagos was 5 million people in 1980, and we're now at about 25 million, and projected to be 40 million by 2050 and up to 100 million by 2100. This is not just because of the natural birth rate of the city. There's also a massive amount of migration from the region, other states in the country, but also from the rest of the West African sub-region, especially as people flee political tensions, whether climate change impacts or seek economic opportunity. And so we've got a massive urban sprawl. And how does that translate for us? There's a significant incursion into wetlands and just legitimate settlements. As people come in, they're looking for economic opportunity. They settle illegally wherever they can find. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of building. Everyone wants to build because everyone wants to move to Lagos. And that puts a lot of pressure on infrastructure. So you have settlements that have been designed to be low density that are now high density. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of land. And so, if you basically have a single or low number of stories, you can't accommodate as many people. Very, very huge footprint, the people, but also the impact that we're having on the land and the environment. And so it's very challenging to respond to that as a city. But Lagos, of course, will always do what it needs to do. So what are the main challenges we have? The challenges, of course, we're subnational. So first of all, we have no control, we have very limited control on how people come in and leave the state. Once you're in Nigeria, you can pretty much come to Lagos. It's estimated that about 86 people an hour come into Lagos. And then, of course, there are the extreme weather events that we've talked about. Lagos experiences extreme heat. We've seen sea level rise. I'm sure for those who may have seen, there's been quite a bit of flooding in Nigeria in the past few weeks. Thankfully, because of the work that we've been doing over the years, Lagos being a low-lying city, we haven't had a significant loss of life, but there is still that impact, and there is a significant amount of work that needs to be done.
Lack of access to water and sanitation, which is really the difference between life and death, and the lack of access in a city of Lagos or Nairobi, where I lived 7 years, is serious. And there's either too much, too little, or it's too polluted water. And in Dire Dawa in Ethiopia, every year there's a big flood where many people die, and 50% of the year people lack access to potable water. And that's the same water cycle. So that urban water resilience is a real key thing to advance. And this week we've been able to launch an Aqua Fund, which really looks at support of investing in more innovative and decentralized water solutions in African cities, scaling to 100 by 2032. So that's the second point. And I have only 3 points and not 10, so don't worry. So third point is where we see there's a step change needed, and where we see that the pandemic showed us almost parts of cities. I mean, if you look at the media coverage of cities and informal settlements, it's like as if it was a surprise that this is part of cities and towns. The future of cities is actually that. That's the future of cities. So if we not drastically work with city authority and national authorities to develop affordable or even better low-cost housing, The moment that you talk about affordable, it's already too expensive. Low-cost housing, well-serviced, and I come back to that access to urban services, places where people can thrive and can take a bus to maintain their livelihoods. There we see that the huge opportunity and the good thing, and we all know that here in this COP conference, that investing in low energy and affordable housing is the best and the biggest job creator that you can have.
Up next, the role of multilateral development banks in climate funding for Africa and its cities. Welcome back. I am Justina Okechukwu. Now, multilateral development banks play an essential role in mobilizing finance for climate action in cities at scale, and that's why the African Development Bank have joined other MDBs looking to provide actions needed to support meaningful investments for low carbon and resilient development in Africa and around the world. Here is an excerpt from the panel at the COP27 UN Summit.
I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the private sector in our Green Cities program, which is a program of the bank to foster climate action in cities, as the name suggests. One of the examples is here in Egypt, actually, 6th October City, where we have financed a dry port facility just close to Cairo, and that was through a public-private partnership. And I mean, I think it was the first public-private partnership in the sector, and it's going to lead to something in the order of 40,000 tons of CO2 mitigated per year. So it's a significant project, and that was complemented by some technical assistance with NUCA, so the New Urban Cities Authority here, as well as the 6th October City themselves. So we cooperated with the private sector, but also with the government to provide technical assistance on environmental challenges and on gender inclusion. There are other private sector deals that we've got underway at the moment, another dry port and a desalination plant, all of those public-private partnerships. And I guess the question is, what can we as MDBs do to foster the private sector engagement? Because let's face it, the capital of even all of our banks together is not going to solve the climate challenge in cities. And I think one of the things that we're all doing is fostering the public-private partnership approach to finance, both with technical side and legal side. And through EBRD Green Cities, we also have these Green City action plans. And all of the actions in those, we work with not just co-financiers from the other MDBs, but also with private sector to identify where the potential is for investment action to be invested and have investments from the private sector.
One initiative where that's especially the case, I think, is the City Climate Gap Fund. And this is where we provide early stage, upfront technical support for developing countries in preparing climate smart urban projects. And I would say this is a true partnership because, of course, we're implementing it with the World Bank. And in fact, it was the Covenant of Mayors that pointed out that there was a gap in the project cycle that needed to be filled. And this is the very purpose of the Gap Fund, is to go right in early stage and help them prepare the projects. So what we're doing with the World Bank at the moment is, I think we've created a partnership forum. And this provides a space where the city networks and donors and other partners can get together and discuss some of the key horizontal themes that are relevant for project preparation, capacity building, knowledge sharing, lessons learned, all these kinds of things. And I think that works well. And on the EIB side, actually with funding from the German and the Luxembourg governments, we are implementing the Gap Fund through a partnership with GIZ. And here we've set up a specific collaboration with ICLEI. And the purpose of this is to set up a community of practice, if you like, for selected cities that have accessed the funds for help and support beyond the end of the GAP work, so through into project preparation and implementation. I think this provides a forum, again, for knowledge sharing and so on and so forth. So I think it's working really well.
And that's all on the package of the show this week. I'm sure you enjoyed it. Remember to follow Energy Frontiers on Frontier Africa Report's website and across all our social media handles as indicated on the screen. It's goodbye from me, Justina Okechukwu. See you next time.